Hey everybody, welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Really excited about our episode today. I think our interview is really packed with great information, isn't it, Patty?
Oh, I have to say, I my head was starting to hurt a little bit,
Yeah.
because there was so much to
Right.
take in. But I think it's a really awesome opportunity,
Yeah.
for ISOs and agents to, boost their revenues and provide a real important service to the merchants.
Yeah, and I'd encourage our listeners, the first part of the interview, we really are kind of setting the context for, data breaches and things like that. Listen through that. There is some great opportunities in there for ISOs, especially towards the end of the interview that you're going to want to hear. And then Patty, tell us about the Insiders Report.
It's all about buy now, pay later schemes, which are really taking off
Yep.
these days. I mean, they have been for maybe the last few years, but in an era when people were pinching pennies and trying to stretch their dollars, this is starting to be a real viable option for merchants and an opportunity for ISOs and agents.
Yeah, I look at it a lot like merchant cash advance in terms of if you want to make sure your merchants know that you offer this. If you do not offer consumer financing programs to your merchants, you're missing out because they're going to go in a different direction at some point. They are going to offer it at some point in the next 24 months if they have an average ticket above, let's say, a couple $100. So you really want to make sure they know, hey, I do offer these. If they want it, they're gonna get it from you. And then in questions from the field, I just talk about those who are really good at sales, right? And I talk about what they can do in this industry to make that transition from maybe $200,000 or $300,000 a year as a stockbroker or a realtor. How can they get into our industry? And I talk about leasing and I talk about cash discounting, some controversial things. If you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear your opinion. Go to my Facebook group or shoot me an email. And I always love to hear people who disagree with me. So you might disagree with me on this one, and that's fine. I'd love to hear your opinion. Before we dive in today, Patty, of course, we want to tell everybody that our official sponsor of the podcast is Valor Paytech. They are an amazing technology company, processor agnostic, leading the way with cash discounting and surcharging. And they have just a ton of omni-channel solutions that a lot of processors, I think, are starting to notice and starting to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that anybody who hasn't yet checked out ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, should do so.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, there you go. Let's dive in and let's talk about privacy and security.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Okay, well, folks, we're James and I are here today with an old friend of mine, Dr. Ross Fettergreen. Ross and I have known each other, we figured out, for over 20 years, which of course means that we probably met in college. But then he went out and became a doctor. So Ross, welcome to the podcast. And would really like, a lot of times when we start these podcasts, we like to kind of give people a feel for where our interviewees are coming from. So maybe if you could give us a thumbnail sketch of your career thus far and what brought you to Merchant Services and your company, CSR Privacy Solutions.
Sure, I'd be very happy to. So my career has always been in the interface between payments and regulatory issues and regulatory matters. When I got out of the military, I went and, thanks to the military, got my PhD and my MD from Yale. And then following that, I worked at various consulting houses in New York and eventually ended up selling several businesses that I developed to various venture capital groups. In 1998, after I had sold my third reincarnation, I started CSR. And CSR has always focused on two aspects, which are related and integrated, which are regulatory issues related to payments and transfer of data. Mm-hmm. As the company has matured over the last 20 years, we have focused more on data transfers rather than strictly payments, but it's always been something of great interest. So today, CSR is a rather eminent or preeminent company in the data security space. We provide our services in over 17 countries, Europe, North America, and APAC. And we principally provide 3 levels of services. Number one, for the small, medium business or SMB marketplace. And then we do consulting for very large multinationals. And then we do a lot of regulatory work as it relates to various types of actions from regulators against or with merchants. So that's pretty much the story of where we are.
Okay, cool. Well, that's helpful. And, one of the reasons, James, I wanted Ross to come and be interviewed is because he's been talking a lot about personal information. Yeah. As opposed to, in terms of protecting personal information,
right,
as opposed to just protecting card information.
Right.
And I was hoping, Ross, that maybe you can explain what PI encompasses and how it can be compromised. What's the appeal here? What are you trying to get at?
Very good. Thank you, Patty. So first off, let me step back for a second. PCI is, in fact, from a regulatory viewpoint, a small subset of the broader picture, which is called personal information. And personal information encompasses anything that can be used to identify what's called the data subject or an individual. This, for example, includes financial information, medical information, biometric information, personal data, and it can be material that has been altered or changed as long as it can get back. PCI, on the other hand, is extremely limited in that it really just covers the transactional information for a credit and debit card transaction. On the federal level, credit and debit cards are one of 5 protected areas, which include credit and debit cards, driver license numbers, social security numbers, and bank routing and transit numbers. The other, what we think is a very important component, is, as you know, PCI is a sectoral, or meaning industrial driven set of requirements for PCI, whereas PI, personal information, is regulatory driven. And currently there are over 300 regulations in the United States that track this information and that require compliance. All 50 states have them, and right now 103 sovereign nations have specific regulations as it relates to PI, or personal information.
Yes, my understanding is that, like in Europe, it's very big, right? I mean, that's where I first saw it coming up as an important issue.
Yes, and in fact, there is something called the General Data Protection Regulation,
right,
the GDPR, which is a significant regulatory factor within the entire European Union. And just like it's interesting, just like PCI was a quote unquote political settlement between the card brands and American Express and DFS in terms of having a single security mechanism, GDPR was similar. It was designed to bring together the various rules and disparate rules that the 24 member states and 2 treaty states of the EU had. So when you were in compliance with one, you were out of compliance with something else. Absolutely identical to what was going on with the various brands and non-brand cards, American Express, DFS, JCB, before PCI was crafted.
Right.
So Ross, let me see if I can kind of catch up a little bit, and maybe for our listeners as well, who like me are maybe not quite the experts that you and Patty are in all of this. So obviously when we talk about PCI, we're talking about payment card information. So we're just talking about credit card numbers, expiration dates, CVC codes, cardholder data. But it sounds like what you're saying is more and more as we see these data breaches and things like that, we're seeing kind of a larger concern from consumers that, hey, we want all of our information protected. So, obviously PCI is something that a lot of the ISOs and companies in our industry do make a lot of money on. They have these PCI fees that they charge and things like that. I would imagine that merchants now are probably starting to want a little bit more for their money and kind of questioning, what are we getting and is our data really being protected? So can you explain to our listeners, maybe at a high level, how is this idea of PI or personal information protection, how is that going to kind of take over this idea of more of a limited scope PCI compliance?
Well, it's a very, very good question, but I think it already has. The fact of the matter is that from a regulatory viewpoint, no one is sued by the Federal Trade Commission, no one is sued by the Attorney Generals over PCI per se. What they are sued over is a data breach falling under the rules and regulations of personal information. And in terms of the cost structures associated with it, it's night and day. Is there an opportunity for ISOs and others in the field to increase and make more money? I believe the answer is yes. When PCI became all the rage, if you will, we all know that many in the industry started charging fees for it. Those fees have, by and large, reduced, and the value of the lesser self-assessment questionnaires, the SAQAs, and all of this for the level 4 merchants are really non-existent. In the regulatory world of PI, there is no distinction based upon the size of the company, which there is for PCI, by any method of measurement, number of employees, revenue, et cetera. So I think the value, the importance, and frankly, the trouble that one can get into for failure of doing PI is significantly larger than with PCI.
So when we hear these lawsuits that, the challenges at the FTC when it's, taking companies to task over privacy issues, that's over PI issues, right? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Correct.
And is the FTC, is that the major regulatory body that oversees this in terms from the federal perspective? I realize there's state laws as well, but from a federal perspective, is it just FTC or is DOJ and CFPB involved?
There is the entire alphabet soup of agencies within the federal government. There are now 17 major federal regulations related to personal information. For example, health information is primarily regulated by the Office of Civil Rights, believe it or not, in HHS.
Oh, really? Huh.
Office of Civil Rights, if you look at their website, they issue right now 1,200 to 1,400 fines per month. They have the highest referral rate to the Department of Justice of any agency in the United States. They have a 4% referral rate, and that means that 4% of their cases are referred for criminal sanction. That's the only reason why it gets the Department of Justice. In terms of the Federal Trade Commission, they are an important player, but they are far from the only player. Treasury is also involved very significantly in those matters which are financial, as is the CFPB. So you can name an agency and you're involved. From a examination viewpoint or from a criminal investigation viewpoint, the United States Secret Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are equally involved in these case matters.
So it sounds like if I could kind of back up and frame this a little bit for our listeners, it sounds like what you're saying here, Ross, is that our industry has really been focused on this one area of PCI and protecting cardholder information. But it sounds like what you're saying is that focus is now out of date and just far too narrow. And in fact, there's this much larger umbrella of personal information that our merchants are coming into contact with, partly because of our point of sale systems and everything else, partly because of things they're doing. And it sounds like you're saying there's this need, this desire in the marketplace that merchants are not looking at it just as PCI. They're saying, we have a risk here. We don't want to break the law. We don't want to get in trouble for the way we're handling customer information. And there might be an opportunity for ISOs to help their small business clients and medium business clients to better protect all the information associated with their customers. Is that roughly what you're saying?
It's not roughly, it's exactly correct.
Okay.
So it's very well said. So
James is very good at getting things down to
well, I'm just trying to get it myself. So now I understand. So Patty, continue.
No. I'm glad you asked that, because that was a perfect way to put it. Let me ask you, Ross, because a lot of things have changed with this whole COVID-19 pandemic. Has that had an impact on the need for on the PI piece of this? I mean, because it would seem to me, I know I get reports almost every day across my desk about data breaches. I mean, they seem to be really ballooning right now. Is that part of what you're talking about as well?
Yes, absolutely. The whole pandemic, the COVID situation, has vastly accelerated the need for protection, and it's happened in 4 distinct areas. Number one, because of the diffuse nature now of the employees, they are no longer working in hardened work environments. So the porosity, or how soft their areas of security are in the home vary, but are dramatically increased. Secondly, we have had many clients call us regarding the issues related to personal health information, PHI.
Sure.
In other words, what are they allowed to get from their employees or visitors? How are they allowed to report them? How are they allowed to share them? The rules of the game are extremely complex, and frankly, nobody knows what the absolute limits of these rules are. Number three, what is very subtle about it, but it is very important about it, is that the transfer of this information is really under attack from a whole bunch of reasons. For example, you had mentioned, Patty, the General Data Protection Regulation. Well, the California Acts are sort of called mini GDPRs, and there's what's also called the New York Shield Act, and a whole bunch of other things. They really put strong limitations on how this information is transferred and handled. And fourth, the wild card, which really nobody knows at this point, are what are the lawsuits going to look like for failure to comply with unclear or unknown regulations. In fact, right now we are, as an expert witness or members of our team, are involved in over 75 class action lawsuits as witnesses for one side or the other, or experts on one side or the other. So this is an absolutely exploding area, and frankly, many small and mid-sized businesses are affected by this.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, now that you've explained, the importance of this, and we have a good understanding of the importance of protecting personal information, could you maybe discuss what ISOs and their partners can do in terms of like updating their service offerings, in this new era of PI protection?
Yes, absolutely. First, I just want to step back again for a second and give you a bit of an understanding of what the legalities of this are.
Okay.
Because I think that's really important to frame the rest of the conversation as to what we do and why we do it. So in the real world, people have this belief set that all of these breaches, or the vast majority of these breaches, come from a boogeyman coming through the wall or through the internet and stealing their information. That is so far from what is actually going on. It's almost laughable, although I fully appreciate why people think this. The important thing to realize is that from a legal viewpoint, and I hate to be so legalistic about it, but I think it's important because it will answer the question. There are only 3 classifications of data breach. Once you accept the fact that 2/3 of these are physical rather than electronic, there is nothing electronic about the vast majority. It's basically somebody loses a laptop, somebody loses a paper file, somebody doesn't lock a drawer, somebody doesn't fill in the blank. So literally half of all these events have nothing to do with anything electronically. With that said, and this is again getting back to what I'm going to be talking about, there are 3 types of breaches that all breaches can fall into. The first one is called accidental, and that encompasses over 90% of all breaches. And by legal definition, an accidental breach has 2 characteristics. One, that the person who has the personal information, or PCI for that matter, had the legal authority to have it. And number 2, that they were trying to use it for an appropriate use, thus accidental. The second group is called malicious, and this is roughly 6-7%, maybe 8% of all events. And in that case, the 2-tier test is, 1, the person that's using the information has the authority to use it, but they are using it for a not authorized or legal position.
For a nefarious intent.
Yes, exactly. And the best example of that is a disgruntled employee.
Right.
Someone who is doing something intentionally to harm whoever they're working for or working with. The smallest number, less than 1, way less than 1%, is what everybody thinks is going on, which is the hack, quote unquote. And the 2-tier test here is that the person going after the information, or the entity going in for the information, does not have the legal authority to have it in the first place and is clearly using it for a nefarious or illegal purpose. Sell it on the black market, whatever you will. So you have to keep that in mind. So how do we help ISOs or the merchant services community, number one, gain from this, and number two, really give their merchants a value-added service? Well, we do it by providing a bundle of services. There are 3 services involved. The first one is a privacy assessment, which is a SaaS-based program, which is specific to the country of origin of the merchant. So we have one for the United States, we have one for Canada, we have one for Australia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what the privacy assessment is a very detailed set of questions which allows the user to find out what they need to improve or what they need to have in terms of correct policies, procedures, and practices. So when they go through this, they are given as an end result several things. Number one, a series of scores on the various areas that they've examined themselves in. Secondly, a prioritized remediation of how to fix these things. And most importantly, they are given the answer sets in terms of procedures and protocols of how to fix or remediate the problems. When they go through that process, they are then given a trust shield called ID Stay Safe, which indicates that they have successfully completed this remediation process. We have tens of thousands of merchants globally that have gone through this process successfully. So number one of the 3-legged stool is a privacy assessment. The second leg of the stool is threat or vector analysis. And again, let me just step back for a second. In terms of the privacy assessment, this is initiated by the merchant. The second leg of this is the threat analysis. We scan their sites for vulnerabilities, over 1,000 ports, as well as we scan their websites for service packs, for vulnerabilities, etc. This is completely passive. Once we have the IP address and we have the URL of the merchant, or the MID, if you will, then our systems automatically do this once a month and provide the merchants with a, again, prioritized listing of those areas that need to be questioned, fixed, remediated, etc. This is all logged, so there's a permanent record of it in case there ever is a problem, and we follow this up on a monthly basis. So in this case, it's completely passive. The third part of this is our breach analysis. We actually have the US and global patents on breach analysis, and we've had them for many years. Our systems are used globally. And what this is we have full operational call centers in Australia, Europe, and North America. If, for example, some merchant suspects or believes that they've had a breach of some nature, they are given an 800 or local number to call our centers, and from there, they are actually assigned a certified privacy specialist who then works them through whatever their need sets are. This includes regulatory reporting and consumer notification. Interestingly, 60 to 65% of the calls that we get turn out to be non-reportable events for one of 100 reasons. The third that are reportable, they have an average of 7 to 9 regulatory reports related to one event, and then there's consumer notification on top of that. So it's giving the ISO a tremendous package at extreme value to send to their merchants. It has 3 components as stated. It has the privacy assessment, which is SaaS-based. It has the scanning, and it has the breach reporting. So we believe that this does a number of things, as it does for many of our resellers. Number one, it increases their recurrent monthly revenue. Number two, it increases the valuation of their business. Number three, it increases the retention or the stickiness of their clients, and a whole host of things that occur. And we do this without any cost to them, without any capital requirement. We bill them after they bill their merchants successfully.
So Ross, I have a couple of quick kind of follow-up questions to that, because that was very interesting. So when you talked about the shield, I can't remember the exact name at the beginning, the trust shield, I think you said, right?
Yes, the ID stay safe.
Okay. So when they complete that, I mean, first of all, would it be accurate to say that that's kind of like a beefed up self-assessment questionnaire with just a lot more questions to get more information about how they're handling all information? Is that kind of what it is, or?
Yes, I mean, that's an absolutely fair statement, that it is beefed up to make sure that it does account for those issues related to PI.
Okay.
Personal information.
So as a result of that, does this program then replace the current PCI things that the ISO would be doing, or is this an additional program and they would still need some kind of PCI program?
We do not replace PCI. There's a significant amount of overlap.
Okay.
And ours is much broader, but we do not replace it.
Okay. All right. I just want to clarify that. So these ISOs would still potentially have their same PCI programs, their same revenue that they're collecting, and this would be like an additional, hey, this is like a almost like a breach protection type thing that they would be presenting to the, full PI package, I guess, is the idea, right?
Right. This augments what they currently are selling and have. That's absolutely correct.
What's the sales pitch? I'm sorry, James. Did you want to?
Go ahead. You're fine.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I'm an ISO or an agent, what would be my sales pitch to merchants?
Okay, so first off, we do not suggest anybody sell it. We suggest that they impose it, because frankly, we know now with over 250,000 users, et cetera, most SMBs would not purchase it.
Okay.
But what we do provide is a very well-documented set of messaging, which basically points out they need it. With that in mind, we have about an 80 to 85% take rate, but it is not an opt-in, it is an opt-out program. And, to quote Mr. Shepard for a second, in reading his material, he talks about 3 items for a good sale. So let's talk about that. So what Mr. Shepard advocates is a great opening pitch, prospect daily, and close the offer range. That's what they talk about. Well, we believe this is a great opening pitch. And in fact, we know from Mark Beauchamp and others in Survive and Thrive and other books that have written that this really represents tier 2 products according to that algorithm, that being information security and biometrics, which are the classical tier 2 products under the Beauchamp model. So when you look at both of those things, I think we're fulfilling those requirements because we are giving people things that they need. There isn't a merchant out there that isn't aware of identity theft, quote unquote, and the issues involved. In fact, the statistics are rather frightening. 60% of small merchants who've had a data breach are out of business within 6 months. And that's pretty consistent, has been repetitively shown. So the sales pitch really is, we give them informational pieces that inform their merchants that this is being added for their benefit and all the reasons thereof. We then have them provide that. And again, we have about an 80+% stick rate across, as I said, we have about 170 major resellers in 17 countries. And that seems to be consistent numbers.
Wow, very interesting. Okay, so I think I'm starting to really understand that. It makes a lot of sense. And I like the idea of the opt-out as well. I mean, I know a lot of ISOs are familiar with that concept. They'll implement something and, reach out to all of their, maybe they've got 10,000 mids and they'll say, hey, we've had increasing concerns over, issues with data breaches, et cetera. So here's the program. You can opt out if you don't want it. So I get all of that. So can you talk a little bit about, for the ISOs that say, okay, that sounds interesting, maybe we want to pursue that, what's in it for them? What's the revenue opportunity? You can't maybe get too specific, but what's kind of the general idea of the revenue? Is this like an ongoing fee that the merchant pays and then the processor gets some of that, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, no, and I can be very open about that, as we always are. This particular program, the buy price, if you will, or the wholesale price, is $5 per mid per month. So it's an ongoing cost to the ISO. The average retail price of this product is between about $15 and $40 per month. So it's multiple times Keystone. The reason why I say $15 to $40 is we don't have a single reseller that charges across their portfolio the same price. Most of them, and we suggest strongly they do that, they divide their portfolio into fourths or fifths and change the pricing based upon the value of that relationship. I don't know of any retail environment where the price is really below $15 per month. And once people are on these programs, they just don't fall off because they realize that there's such value in it. One of the things that can be argued, which I think is a very true statement, is that people don't realize the value of the product that they're getting. This is why the scanning is passive. We are providing them every month with detailed scans, detailed reports, detailed logging, whether they do anything or not. As long as they're willing to give us their IP address and the URL, we're out there doing it.
Right.
This way, the merchant sees, and all of our programs, by the way, are white labeled, are out there seeing that this ISO relationship, increased retention, quote unquote, is providing them with a service. Another interesting point is that we have over half of our resellers have set up separate websites or otherwise to sell our product independently of their core services. And this has been extremely successful. So not only does this enhance their revenue from their traditional position of an ISO, but if they wish to, we have all the mechanisms in place for them to set up a separate online sales, and in fact, we have several that have done in the physical world as well, position so that they actually open up a completely new revenue stream unrelated to their principal revenue stream from merchant services.
Cool. Okay, so let's say an ISO decides that they want to work with CSR. What would be the steps that they would take? And how exactly? I mean, I guess you touched on pricing, but how is the billing handled? If you can just touch on that again.
Sure. So the way this works is we have a very defined implementation process, and we have a team of folks that are implementation managers. So once we have X sign a contract, this is what occurs. The implementation process is divided into 5 very well-defined steps. And those steps are, number 1, an intro call with our manager, whoever's assigned to that company. And during that intro call, which usually lasts 30 minutes to an hour, a number of key points are driven home. Number 1, a timeline is established and we meet the team. We discuss with them various opportunities for rollout and try to figure out what would be the best rollout given their circumstances, and we discuss our marketing strategies and collateral. Following that, our second step is training, and this is done by Zoom. In larger relationships, we actually deploy teams to up to 5 days out to a major relationship, public companies, and very large institutional users of our service. But in general, it's done by Zoom. It lasts 90 minutes to 120 minutes, and there are multiple training schedules if needed. And there's additional training for sales and proactive selling. So we really want to make sure, and it is the only job of the implementation team to absolutely make sure that the partner is comfortable and familiar with our processes. Step 3, we provide them with announcements and introduction letters according to the schedule, including marketing pieces which are customized for the particular environment, and schedules to count back from the merchant's launch date, so all of that is done correctly. Step 4 is launch. We provide welcome letters, messaging for invoices and all of that, and help the partner respond to customer inquiries and stand in their shoes where needed. And finally, step 5 is where the service begins to move forward and our breach and other services are available, people are using them, and then we bill the merchant based upon the number of users that they have declared and registered at that $5 price on an ongoing basis. So since we've been doing this for so long, and I don't want to say that we know every possible thing that exists, we don't, but we have a pretty good handle on a process that has worked extremely well from very large relationships to reasonably small relationships.
Well, this has been really enlightening. I have to. It's been a lot of information. So, and I'm sure, I know I have more questions. I'm sure our listeners have some more questions. If somebody wants to, reach out and learn more about what CSR is offering, where would you send them?
Well, sure. First off, they could go to our website, which is csrcyberprivacy.com. Again, csrcyberprivacy.com. We have a dedicated telephone number for merchant services, and that's 1-833-899-9929. Again, 1-833-899-9929. And my direct email is Ross, my first name, .Federgreen, FEDERGREN, at csrcyberprivacy.com. Cyberprivacy. I think I might have said cybersecurity. This website is CSR Cyber Privacy. We have a second website that find us anyway. But we have a dedicated website, which is csrcyberprivacy.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ross. I really appreciate you taking the time to educate us and our listeners this week.
Great info.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Jim.
So everybody, we're talking about Valor Paytech, and Patty, today we really just want to talk about cash discounting. We've been talking about it already, and in the questions in the field, I talk about it. And the truth is, if you still are using technology from the processor, from the acquirer that's really specific, I personally don't know of any fantastic solutions out there that I feel like are really industry leading, cutting edge. Whereas with Valor Paytech, you can do the cash discounting or the surcharging, but of course you can do it in this omni-channel integrated way with gateways and all that, right?
Right. Which just, I think, makes it really slick. I mean, it's not like you have to go in and you have to start changing things just to be able to, offer a streamlined cash discounting or surcharging option. It's just flip a switch if you don't want to. I mean, one of the things that I thought was very cool when they gave us the demo is that if let's say I'm a merchant, I have a really special customer. I could just say, one button, one click of the mouse, and the added charge goes away.
Right. Right. Having that waive the fee option. What's interesting too, Patty, there's actually a large ISO that I do consulting for that just went with Valor Paytech, and they're, using them to sell hundreds of cash discount deals a month. And one of the reasons they did it, I thought was kind of interesting, because they said that right now about a third of all the cash discount sales that they're making is they're actually flipping people from existing cash discount programs, because
really
they're having markets that are already getting that saturated. Right? Yeah. And so what happened was, a lot of these early cash discount deals that were made 2 or 3 years ago, the pitch to the merchant was, we're going to wipe out your processing, but the trade-off is you don't have any good technology, right? We're going to give you a crappy terminal. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't connect to anything, but there's no processing fees. And the merchant was like, well, okay, fine. It wasn't ideal, but they said, sure. Now, this company's coming in and saying, well, guess what? You don't have to make that trade-off anymore. We're going to use Valor Paytech. You can have a great, online ordering. You can have all this amazing stuff that we have, and the gateways and the terminals, and it integrates with POS systems. It's like, this is like an awesome solution. And it's, processor agnostic, so they can, put it in and go out there and sell it. So I think, as cash discounting is maturing, I think more and more this idea of providing additional technology with the cash discount, it's like, hey, they're already bought into cash discounting. Now let's get them some technology. So I think that's going to play a role as well.
I agree. And I think, you talk about, the clunkiness of the initial services, cash discounting services. And, you look at today where so many merchants are doing online ordering and e-commerce that, to have a robust solution that can support that, as well as once this mess is over and we go back to walking into stores again. I think is really important.
Well, hey, everybody, if you would like to check it out, please head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/VALOR. Fill out the form, get a free demo, check it out. We know that you are going to love it.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So Patty, I actually just did a Q&A session. I've been doing some live ones and things like that. And I actually just did one with a rep who was asking me about selling merchant cash advance versus selling merchant services. And that's not the topic here for the questions from the field, but it brought up an interesting thing. I want to talk about what you can do to make a lot of money if you are an amazing sales professional in this business. And I wasn't sure the right way to title this particular segment today, but it really struck me. So I'll give you a little background. I was talking to this guy. He was a stockbroker for 15 years, and he sold stock over the phone. So this is like Wolf of Wall Street type, situation.
Right.
Now, obviously with more integrity, but this idea of, I told him, I said, I imagine you could sell ice to an Eskimo, this idea of, being really, really good at sales. And, again, I think there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And so I think I can say with confidence that I'm in that same group. I know how to sell anything to anybody. And I know a lot of other sales professionals are the same way. And I think a lot of them, they come to the industry and they're not sure where their skill set is going to make the most money. So the question I guess I'm answering today is, given the assumption that you're incredibly good at sales and you're new to this industry, what should you sell? And I'm gonna say something. I know I'm gonna get some negative feedback. I know I'm gonna get people that are gonna email me and say, James, you're turning to the dark side. But remember, I'm just a greedy capitalist. So, I would sell cash discounting and I would lease terminals. That's just what I would do. Okay. Now, let's talk about this for a second, because I know this will be a topic. People will say, well, first of all, let's talk about cash discount for just a second. Cash discount is a no-brainer. It's a win-win-win. The merchant loves it. It's actually more fair to the consumer, as we've talked about numerous times in the podcast, because the pricing is actually fair based on who's paying more to get more value. And also, it's obviously a huge win for the ISO, and in this case for the agent, who's making $100 to $200 a month in residual income off of every merchant that they sell, depending on the size of the merchant and the compensation package. So it's a no-brainer there. Right. So then the question becomes, why would you lease a terminal? So a couple things about that to keep in mind. Is it harder to lease a terminal than to give one away? Yes. But for somebody who's really, really good at sales, leasing the terminal, it's not going to be incredibly difficult to get a yes, because you're going to wipe out, $500 to $1,000 a month in fees, and you're going to replace it with a $49 a month lease or something like that. So the only real question becomes, is it morally right to do a lease? There's a lot of people in the industry that say, well, leasing is evil, leasing is wrong. And I have to say, and just throwing it out a little bit here, that I really believe most of those people are being very hypocritical. I'll be honest. I can't tell you how many of these people I talk to that, I say, okay, so do you do a price increase on a regular basis?
Right.
Yeah, we just did one. It was a 15 basis point price increase. Okay, so your larger merchants, you're going to charge them an extra $90 a month. You're not even going to ask them or tell them. And that's fine. But if I want to do a $49,
that's moral.
Right. But if I want to do a $49 a month lease up front, and I'm actually going to sell it and get the merchant to say yes and sign a piece of paper agreeing to it, that's not right. Or it's like, well, no, we always do free equipment. Really? Okay. So you don't have any fees for equipment or paper or supplies? Oh, well, we have a $20 a month, equipment whatever rental fee, and then we have a $10 guarantee equipment per, whatever fee, and then we have a $10, I'm like, okay, well, so I can't go to a merchant and sell them at, with no monthly fees at all, and just one $39, $29 lease for X amount of months, and then it's over, and they don't, so I would say, hang on a second, right? Like, a lot of people come and say, well, James, I want to give the merchant the best deal possible. Well, the best deal possible is obvious. Give it to them at cost. Don't make any money and give everything away for free, right? You don't want to give the merchant the best deal possible. That's not what you really want. What you want is you want to make money, and you want to do it in a way that you feel like you can sleep at night and you feel like you're giving them a good value, right? So my belief is, and I'm sure in 2 or 3 years, you'll hear me say it's stupid to lease terminals when you're selling cash discounting, because it will be. Right now, it's not, because it's still new. merchants, it's a huge value. You're like forging ahead. Many of you are in a market where cash discounting is still not like predominant, and it's hard work, and you're convincing them to do something that's very valuable, that is going to make them a ton of extra money. So I think coming in as somebody who really knows how to sell, doing that lease and making that $1,000, $2,000 commission up front off of that lease, there's a lot of agents that are making $150,000, $200,000 a year in another industry because they're absolutely amazing, and they see the residual opportunity in our industry, and they're like, boy, I would love to get in on that, but I can't afford to make $40,000 the first year, right? Come in and sell 12 leases a month, and then you can build that residual up. And by the time it's harder to lease on cash discounting, guess what? You're already going to have residual at $15,000, $20,000 a month, and you're golden. Now you can give it away for free and go with that. So a couple points I wanted to make was, number one, I do not think leasing is evil, any more evil than any other way that you make money. Ultimately, the merchant's paying money, and are they getting sufficient value? And are you being honest and transparent? I think it's evil to trick the merchant into a lease, but it's not evil to sell a lease with transparency and honesty, right?
Right.
And I even tell merchants all the time, I'll tell them and say, look, when you're paying for this, this little terminal is not going to be worth the $3,000 you're going to end up paying and over this period of time. The reason I'm charging you this $49 is because I am going to provide you with a ton of value, and this is the way I extract that value, right? We're going to guarantee that we'll replace the terminal anytime you need, and whatever your specific value proposition
whenever
is.
you need it.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And again, it's the same reason you would charge them a $20 a month this or a $9.95 that. It's just you can put it into a lease. And for those that are trying to make that leap from high earner in sales world to coming to our industry, leases are actually a valid option right now because of cash discounting primarily, and it's a good way to go about it. And so I also am not saying that I think everybody should lease. I don't think that. I think giving a free terminal away is a great strategy. It's one that I used for the last few years. I was selling full time because there wasn't cash discounting, and leasing had kind of gotten a little bit out of date. So I did the free terminal. So I think you should just embrace the reality of your market and make sure you can sleep at night with your decisions. But for me, if I was a $200,000 a year stockbroker and I saw this industry and wanted to take advantage of this opportunity and I wanted to serve small business owners, I would sell cash discounting and lease terminals for as long as that made sense until I got to the point where I had the residual to where I could then step back a little bit and look at what made the most sense at that point.
Very, very good, James. Logical, I think. Thanks for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Patty.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
Okay, well, several items have come across my desk the past few weeks regarding buy now, pay later schemes.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about this in the past, right?
Sure.
Mark Beauchamp from ServePay was on one of our podcasts.
We had FlexBuy.
And FlexBuy, right? That was the other one that I remembered we had done.
Sure.
And I kind of think of these things as a 21st century iteration of layaway plans, right?
Right. Sure.
It's kind of similar to that. And
it's where the merchant doesn't have to take the risk, basically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Just as a little refresher to our listeners, this is how it works. A shopper pays for their purchase balances over time, usually like 4 to 6 weeks. And the debits come from their checking account, and retailers pay a transaction fee for the service.
Mm-hmm.
The transactions some of them carry interest, some of them don't. But obviously, if customers miss payments, there's a late payment and so forth.
Right.
A lot of merchants see this as a sensible alternative to credit cards because of consumers who are leery of stockpiling debt, but they still want to sell their goods to them, right?
Right.
And also because most of these transactions, I didn't realize this until I did some research. Most of these transactions don't get reported to credit reporting agencies. Really, because they're not a revolving credit. They're kind of like a layaway. And so
that's very interesting. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny you bring this up. I actually, for the first time 2 days ago, actually used this. What happened was I was making
shopping with your wife.
Actually, no, not in this case. It was myself. But I was making a large purchase, and it kind of caught me off guard a little bit. And I realized that I did not have a credit card that had I didn't have a debit card or a credit card where I could run a transaction of this size.
Oh, yeah.
And the salesperson very much wanted to close the sale, wanted me to pay. And so she said, well, I tell you what, if you use our consumer financing product, we'll give you 0%, financing for up to 24 months. And I'm like, I said, well, okay, let's do that because I want to get this done. And then I said,
pay it off in a month.
Right. There's no prepay penalty. And so, yeah, it was very interesting. And so it was interesting because it did actually ping my credit. I get a little alert, so it did ping my credit. But to your point, it actually did not show up. It hasn't yet, at least, on my credit report as a revolving line. It just, pinged the report in order to approve me. And I also think it is interesting, unlike layaway programs, you mentioned 4 to 6 weeks, which I know a lot of programs are like that, but there are quite a few now that are even 12, 24 month programs.
Yeah.
So it allows people to do layaway that are much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I've explained to you, I've done the same thing, for like 6 months. Usually I get that, it's been a 6-month deal.
Right.
But like you, I've checked and it doesn't show up on my credit report. So I kind of like the idea because it lets me spread the pain, right?
Yeah. It was it was a very interesting experience. And I will say too, it was surprisingly easy. One of the reasons I never do that kind of stuff is because to me, it's like, just a big pain in the neck for nothing. I'll just usually call the bank. This happened to me on a holiday, but I usually just call the bank and say, hey, increase my limit for a one-time spend, and I'll use my debit card. But in this case, I couldn't do that. And it was like, how am I going to pay? It was like, I don't know how to get my money from my bank over to this merchant. And so it literally took me, I would say, 2 minutes to get this done. And this was like a big transaction. And so I was really, I was impressed actually. It was pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that because I came across a survey by a group called the Ascent, which is a service of Motley Fool, right? If you're familiar with Motley Fool, which I'm sure you are.
Yes.
They surveyed consumers and found a third had used one of these services in the last year.
Wow. Really? I didn't realize it had that kind of market penetration. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I was really surprised. And so when I saw that, I did actually do a little bit of research on market penetration. And what I thought was interesting is, we know Amazon does it. That's been they've been a big purveyor of it with their buy now, pay later. I think it's called, what do they call it?
They changed it, I think now. It's Amazon something now. I can't remember.
Something like that. Yeah. But Saks Fifth Avenue and Target, as well as H&M and Timberland, and a lot of the big brands are doing this now.
Right.
There's an online portal for retailers offering buy now, pay later called Klarna, Klarna. They said that they're up in excess of 100%. Transactions are up 100% this year.
Really?
Yeah. And they're in 60,000 stores nationwide. And apparently, the way this works is you get a Klarna mobile app, which creates a one-time virtual card for the transaction.
Okay.
And it gets, they add it to their preferred digital wallet, and then they can it becomes a contactless transaction also, right?
Wow. Huh.
Afterpay is another company that offers a similar online type solution. It says its transactions at retail clients jumped 87% from January through November, compared to an 18% increase in debit card payments at its participating merchants, and 11% drop in credit card payments.
Wow.
And this was the statistic that really got me though. Over the Black Friday weekend, Afterpay said these transactions were up 186% over its cumulative of 4 years of transactions. It's been in business for 4 years. It said on that weekend it did more almost 200% as many transactions as it had done in the previous 4 years.
Good night. Wow.
Which I think really speaks to the whole coronavirus and people feeling pinched and so forth, right?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Yeah, for sure.
And it's also the market's heating up. There's a company called Affirm that's based in San Francisco.
Sure.
Right, I've heard. Yeah, they just purchased PayBright, which is a leading provider up in Canada.
Right,
and paid over $250 million, $265 million.
Wow,
for this.
Yeah.
So and I found the quote. I found the story on NBC.com. They quoted this guy, Brad Lindenberg, who's the co-CEO of QuadPay, yet another one of these companies.
Sure.
And he thinks that buy now, pay later is going to become ubiquitous as free shipping is today.
Yeah.
He said, quote, every site, I think, within a matter of a couple of years will have an option to pay in installments.
Yeah. And I think the thing too is, I think it's just becoming, and it's interesting how it tags in with our interview we just did there. I mean, I think as personal information, it's like a two-way street. It's becoming much easier to share your personal information and to get digitally like instant results of like you're approved for this or whatever. But then at the same time, of course, that adds that burden of there's all this extra information digitally floating around out there. We need to be careful what we do with it. But I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think, what I get from the bottom line on this is that, if you're catering to small businesses, particularly those selling, big ticket items, like electronics and furniture,
right?
You need to be taking notice of this and take action to integrate this into your service offerings.
I could not agree more. We've had in the Facebook group, a lot of people have been talking about it. It's just one of those things. And again, like we mentioned, Serve Credit, we mentioned FlexBuy. I mean, there definitely are programs out there. You can go back and listen to previous episodes. But there are definitely great reseller programs out there where you can make a decent amount of profit from giving your merchants this ability. And of course, for them, it helps them to be able to, and obviously this is getting weighted more towards the higher ticket size merchants, obviously.
Of course, sure.
If you're a pizza shop, it's not going to let people buy now and pay later, But
who wants to pay for their pizza a month from now?
Right. So I think that's obvious, but I think, it's a great opportunity. So thanks for bringing it to our attention again, Patty.
Yeah, and just in case people were looking, I did a little bit of research. We covered this in 2018 and in 2019.
Cool.
So
okay, there we go.
Go through our archive if you want to find out more about FlexBuy and ServePay.
Awesome. Good stuff, Patty.
Thanks, James.
This episode of the Merchant Sales Podcast was brought to you by Valor Paytech, the technology company that is revolutionizing cash discounting and surcharging with innovative features like dual mid support, waive the fee options, and even adding non-cash adjustment charges to tips. Now, all of this is made possible by a variety of technology devices and solutions such as gateways, tabletop point of sale devices, and features like SMS text messaging and e-invoicing, all with cash discounting in mind. Valor Paytech, bold ideas, smart execution. Make sure you head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR. Schedule your free demo today and watch videos and learn more about this amazing technology solution.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.